And I think the art of persuasion is through building trust and a good rapport. And this is the key, really, I believe, to achieving. I think it's what fills the gap between dreaming and doing, between hoping for it and achieving, and between talking and making things happen.
The most important person you have to persuade that something is a good idea is yourself. If you don't really understand why you're doing it, you probably shouldn't do it. And getting it right is, I think, fundamental to persuasion. Persuading someone to join you, persuading someone to back you, which you guys will talk about a bit more later, is fine. But you've got to get the things underneath that right. And you've got to be true to yourself and true to the things that you believe. One of the things that all these people that told me not to set up a business told me to do was keep it all to yourself. Don't give away the equity, give away the profit, give away salaries if you want, but don't give away the equity. Now, I knew nothing about business, I guess, like some of you guys out there. But I thought, well, that doesn't seem right to me. Other people can take risks. I want to persuade other people to join me. Why shouldn't I share it? And everyone said, no, focus on the slice. Own 100%, own 100%. And in a very naive way, I thought, actually, it's not about the slice. It's about the size of the overall cake in the end. And I believed then, and I still believe now, that in fact sharing out means you'll end up with a bigger cake, and if it's the amount of money that's left at the end that's important to you, you will end up with more money. And you have to be able to understand how you make money. And I see lots of business ideas, and some look fantastic. But unless you can see exactly how the money comes through the idea and ends up in somebody's pocket, I think there's more work to be done. I think the other thing which works then and it works now is that you've got one real opportunity when you start up to take advantage of the fresh start, which means that you can look at all the things around you that don't work particularly well. And you can say, in my business, it's not going to be like that. If you go back to this period, which will seem unimaginable to most of the people around here, in an office, you used to write things down and you used to hand them to somebody else in writing. They would type them up. Now, this is real. They would type them up. They would hand back the bit of paper that was typed up, and you would correct it by hand, and you would hand it back to them, and they would type it up again. And from day one, and this was by now 1990, we said anybody who worked for us would have to produce their materials on a computer. And you're going, well, yeah, we do that all the time. But then nobody did that. We had Windows 3.1, and every single person, we told everyone that joined us, this is what you had to do. And on the first day, every single person that joined us said, that's a really good idea. I'll write this first one up by hand, and then, then I'll get good at it. Because at the moment I was so slow. And then when I've got a bit of practice, then I'll do it on the computer. We said, no. You start on day one, you write it up, you put it on the machine yourself, you learn how to type, and you produce your manuscripts, and we correct them and send them out. And there will be plenty of examples today that you see an established business practices, and you think, that's not right. You've only got one chance of that, and that's when you start off. But our success was we always told potential joiners exactly how it was going to be. So we didn't try and sell them. This is the subtle art of persuasion here. We told them they would have to write things on the computer from day one. We told them that we would expect them to produce around 1,500 hours of chargeable time a year. And these guys had worked in the industry where they were used to spending, as far as I can see, most of the day at lunch or messing about, avoiding work at all costs. But we told them exactly how it was. And some people didn't join us. And we did differentiate on rewarding success. So there was quite a large differentiation in salary between the people who were really productive and the people that weren't productive. We also shared for the first about 7 or 8 years 20% of our profits to the staff. And that had a big effect in the beginning. So for example, when you're 6 or 7, you're in an office and you could get something finished early and stick it in the post that say cost 20p, I made that number up. Or you could put it in a courier that cost £25. People thought, well, actually, that 25 quid divided by 6 of us is actually almost an amount of money I can count and is worth doing. So everybody was focused on the same thing. Small difference, but made a lot. And finally, you should always look on the bright side. Thanks very much.
by nature are generally confident people, although sometimes that can overlap with arrogance. So if you take commercial organisations, you've got buyers with big shelves to fill, strong footfall, and a long line of competitors that are ready to kind of take that slot. So it's not uncommon for them to exude their power in meetings. That can either be through body language, through tone of voice, through fist banging, through shouting and screaming. These are all real life examples. So the reality is you need to be prepared. Know your product, know your market, and know your numbers. Again, when I say product, I talk about this physical product, service, or yourself. So you really need to think about what your product is, and it might sound like an obvious question, but a lot of people communicate that inefficiently. Sometimes it's hard to take yourself out of your own head when you're so consumed with the project and the idea that you're working on. If there's a clear customer need, what evidence do you have to support it? And how are you going to fit in alongside your competitors? So what differentiates you and makes your product or service better than your competitors? This can be anything from the product itself to the value proposition. And that can be a combination of price and or delivery and or customer service. I would advise against talking negatively about who your competitors are, but instead present data, because actually, if you've used your competitors to benchmark your product, the data speaks for itself. That's a much stronger argument than what could otherwise be perceived as your personal opinion. Knowing your numbers. Everybody's time is precious. I think buyers like to think that their time is a little more precious than everybody else's. And if there's one thing that's a guaranteed fire starter, it's sitting in a meeting with somebody presenting their product and the numbers just don't add up. And that could either be down to gaps in data or just, arithmetic. So let's assume you've won over your buyer with compelling market data, clear USPs, and a great customer fit. Now you need to talk about price. You should have a really clear idea of the suggested price of your product, how it's going to sit in that market, and like I mentioned before, how it fits in the overall customer profile. You should also have a good idea of what their margin expectations would be, and this can be one of the hardest things to try and gauge. So kind of get out there, ask people on Twitter. If you've already started to build a peer network community, talk to those people. You would be surprised what information people will share with you when there's perhaps just the very early stages of a relationship, but you've got price, you've got payment terms, you've got delivery costs. What can you offer in terms of marketing? Can you offer them human resource to help kind of alleviate administration at their end? Things that perhaps aren't of cost to you but would add value to them. Some traditional retailers will be absolutely stuck on their margin expectations because they have to hit that number to justify their reporting every week. So if you need to put it all into there, just be sort of aware of what you can concede and the different ways in which you're prepared to kind of hand that over. Closing off the meetings, I think it's really good practice to summarise your understanding of the meeting, the next steps, and to agree timelines. It shows that you're organised, it shows that you're on top of it and that you'd like to kind of move things forward. Be prepared for things to take longer than you've been promised, but don't be afraid to chase. One thing that I found that's worked well is if you've agreed a 2-week time limit, just send a gentle email sort of 3 days before the end of that, just making sure things are on track. Are we still on, are we still going to be able to achieve Friday's deadline? It shows that you're mindful and compassionate that, things can change in business, that you're not pushy, and it also helps you manage expectations at your end if you're reliant on that for something else. In every situation, in every deal, I've really just put myself in the other person's point of view. And again, it probably sounds obvious, but actually if you feel like you're putting their hat on and you sit there and think, well, if I was them, what would I expect and what would I be fighting for? And then be prepared to kind of justify each of those points, actually you can easily achieve. So I guess I would say that until you invest in yourself, again, corny line, sorry, but you won't see the fruits of your labour pay off. But I wish all of you the best of luck for your ventures, whatever they may be.
An extrinsic motivation is where there's a specific incentive for you to do some sort of business with someone. So in the banking context, private banking, if I were to sell you guys a product, I would be incentivized to generate a fee off the back of that. That tends to create a very, very difficult or long-term issue in building actually that trust with that client or that individual. And intrinsic motivation is where there's a sort of an emotional attachment or some other sort of personal belief or mechanism for why you would do business with that person. So for example, that's where you might have a sort of Muslim individual doing Islamic banking, where actually the reason they're doing it is not because of the fee that they'll generate off the back of it, but it's actually because there's a religious context and an emotional motivation for doing that. And the importance of that is really about how people trust and perceive you, and I guess it comes back to what I do in terms of raising capital. If I reflect on my own career, irrespective of the banking stuff in terms of what I'm doing now, the intrinsic motivation I have is that I've always believed in what I've done, and I'm kind of, selling myself. And that's always been a really, really powerful tool in terms of communicating my message, educating people in terms of what I do, and them actually believing me and doing business with them, which is why I'm doing what I'm doing right now. And I think it was interesting that Kanya spoke about effective communication. I'm certainly not disagreeing with her at all. But in terms of what I do and how I operate my business, actually effective communication is largely 90% kind of listening. And instead of telling people what you want from them, you kind of have to listen to understand what they want from you. And that's a tricky balance and a fine balance to be struck in terms of when you're pitching for money effectively. Time, I think, is absolutely critical, and something I've absolutely vehemently agree with Kanya is basically engendering goodwill. And I think in the context of raising finance, if you give something first and you offer yourself or your time or your services initially to that person, and then build up that sort of profile with them, build up that rapport with them, that is without question the quickest way to achieve what you want from them. I've kind of knocked up 5 rules of trust on my tube journey en route seeking which I'm not sure whether they'll stand the test of time, but we'll see. In the context of what I do, firstly transparency, and that touches on the banking reputation and trust and all those sorts of issues that have come out through the recent reports. And I had a discussion with a fellow shareholder today about this. He felt that he was conflicted being a shareholder of this business that I'm doing plus another business, and in pitching at a recent angel investment event, and they were successful, he elected not to declare his interest in my business for the fear that if the investor had understood that and found that out, he would have been worried about the allocation of his time in that business versus my business. And that's a problem. And it's a problem because actually, if that investor finds that information out, and they will do at some point in time, because due diligence is very easy to find out in this market, there's so much information, he's going to get caught out. And on John's point about due diligence, if you take your time and you work thoroughly through the documentation process, the contracts, the way you're working with these people, that will save you many, many hours of sleepless nights. And I say this from a personal experience of a shareholder perspective. It's extraordinarily difficult to resolve. My girlfriend, Kat, we're not married, but from what I understand, a shareholder's dispute is something like getting divorced. It's really bloody painful, and it really is very, very emotional. Actually, there is a lot of value if you just kind of step back and reflect on what we're doing. Just breathe, take your time. Actually, you come across much more effectively. You're a much better sort of presenter, and I think you're a much better investment opportunity if you just take your time and don't rush that process. I think if you come across as being very impatient or pitching in a very urgent manner, a savvy investor or a less sophisticated investor will actually see through that very, very quickly. And at what point do you give away equity, and to who? And it's really, really difficult. And John touched on it, and I just wondered if you guys have comments about that, because it's really hard when it's your equity, but there is a point at which it becomes appropriate.
I think it's down to the size of the cake. And do you want 100% of a mini cupcake, or do you want 50% of a cake that's this big? Really, I think that's what it comes down to. And I guess it's the protective issue again of wanting, and I'm certainly guilty of this, wanting everything to be your own and not wanting to let anybody else in, even down to not selecting a business partner. It didn't help that there weren't necessarily any people available. I didn't feel comfortable going out and finding a stranger because it comes back to that trust and shareholder relationships.
Yeah, I mean, I do believe it varies from individual to individual. So when I was starting my business, I had a partner, and the idea, we discussed it. I had the concept, I brought it to them. We were going to go 50-50 into the venture on the basis that we're both investing into the company. Anyway, when it came to the time to do that, he didn't have the money, but I still gave him a large percentage of shares. I had majority shares, but I still decided to give him shares. Anyway, in the beginning, that was great, because I think, having a business partner is like a marriage, and the skills you need when starting your business is very different to growing your business. And so we were very well suited and matched in the beginning, but we then had different directions that we wanted to go in. So in the end, I ended up buying him out, and actually that was the best thing I could ever do. And so I now own 100% of the business.
But the thing is, how do you take it to the buyers? What are the tips you could give? Because is it because of you had the background, or is it any other form you could approach any other buyers?
Other than just going directly, I mean, that's certainly my approach. Whilst I, worked at Waitrose before, I don't know, I don't have any existing relationships with anybody in the food halls or any of my potential customers. Actually, I've just contacted them directly. Depending on who the organisation is, you'll either get a response or not. You might need to do a certain amount of chasing. In fact, there's a high chance that you will need to do a certain amount of chasing. But you should absolutely just contact them directly. Try to keep your communication succinct, so that you're giving them real headlines about why they should A, read your email, B, call you, and C, potentially set up a meeting with you. And I know, again, that sounds incredibly arrogant, but actually that's how some of the buyers will think. So think of yourself as, think of them as a journalist, and you've got a story. How are you going to get them to listen to you and write about your story? In this case, it's how you're going to get them to even listen to your story in the first place. But just absolutely make direct contact. Call up the switchboard and ask who the buyer for, whatever the product or service is. They'll give you that information.
It was great to have such a broad spectrum of entrepreneurs, so you had insights into different industries. I myself, I have a cupcake company, Keto Blush, so it was quite useful to have Rekha there. She was talking about how she got into Fortnum and Mason and stuff, so it was good to know how to approach buyers and just to have that confidence to go up to them and believe in your product.
Well, as an entrepreneur who's just started up a business, an online business in the last couple of weeks, I thought it was an inspirational evening because we heard from people who had done it, thought of the idea, got off their backsides and actually gone out and made things happen.
And particularly as they're all from different backgrounds and had varying areas of interest and expertise, that was really interesting to hear about the financial aspects, how to speak to buyers, and also the marketing and managing aspects of business.